So every day for almost 2.5, 3 years, I walked the subway and got me a $2 meal, and that's the only money I spent every day, $2.
Young Jeezy made over $3 million selling drugs across multiple states before he ever stepped foot in a recording booth. But here's the crazy part. He never got caught, never did serious time, and somehow managed to transition into one of the most successful rap careers of the 2000s. And in recent interviews, he's been openly bragging about how he pulled this off without ever facing a RICO charge. Today, we're going to break down exactly how he executed this strategy and why his story is completely different from every other rapper turned drug dealer narrative you've heard. Let's quickly define what we mean when we talk about making it out of the drug game. Most people think it's about getting lucky or just deciding to quit one day, but the issue with this definition is that it completely ignores the strategic planning and business mindset required to actually escape that life successfully. For this video, I'm defining making it out as systematically building wealth, avoiding law enforcement, maintaining operational security, and having a legitimate exit strategy, which is exactly what Jeezy did, and it's way more calculated than people realize. So today I've gathered all the details about how J. Wayne Jenkins, better known as Young Jeezy, built a multi-million-dollar drug operation across the Southeast, scaled it to Fortune 500 company levels, strategically avoided federal prosecution, and then transitioned into music before the feds could touch him. We're going to look at his early life in South Carolina, his move to Atlanta, how he built his network, the specific business strategies he used to avoid getting caught, his relationship with BMF, and most importantly, why he walked away from fast money to chase a rap dream. Plus, we'll examine his recent interviews where he's been surprisingly open about his past operations. You'll see what I mean as we go through this story, because Jeezy's approach was completely different from what you'd expect. So let's start with J. Wayne Jenkins, born December 15, 1977 in Columbia, South Carolina. Now, if you're unaware of Jeezy's background, this wasn't some middle-class kid who decided to play gangster for rap credibility. This was a young man born into poverty with an unstable household that would shape everything about his future approach to making money and surviving in America. Jeezy grew up in what he describes as a broken home that was constantly on the edge of financial collapse. His parents struggled with poverty in ways that most people can't imagine. We're talking about a family that relied on food stamps just to eat, had their electricity cut off regularly because they couldn't pay the bills, and dealt with the kind of financial stress that creates lasting trauma. The constant uncertainty about basic necessities like food and electricity eventually led to his parents' divorce while he was still in high school, leaving an already unstable situation even more chaotic. But here's where Jeezy's story starts to diverge from typical poverty narratives. Instead of just accepting this situation or falling into despair, his environment taught him something that would become crucial later: the absolute importance of taking control of your own income and never depending on anyone else for your survival. He wasn't around people who were content with their circumstances or who believed in waiting for someone else to save them. He was surrounded by hustlers, people who were actively trying to change their situation through whatever means necessary, legal or illegal. The psychological impact of growing up in this environment cannot be overstated. When you're watching your family struggle to keep the lights on, when you're going to school hungry because there's no food in the house, when you see your parents' relationship destroyed by financial stress, it creates a very specific mindset about what's possible and what's necessary to survive. Jeezy learned early that traditional paths to success, school, college, getting a job, might not be realistic options for someone in his situation. At the same time, he was observing people in his neighborhood who had found alternative paths to wealth. He was seeing drug dealers driving nice cars, wearing expensive jewelry, taking care of their families, and living with a level of financial security that seemed impossible through legitimate means. This wasn't about glorifying the drug game. This was about a young man making rational calculations about his options based on what he was seeing around him. The issue with growing up in this environment is that you don't see a lot of legitimate paths to wealth that feel realistic or achievable. When you're watching your family struggle despite working legitimate jobs, and then you see people in your neighborhood achieving financial success through illegal means, it creates a very specific understanding of how the world actually works versus how people say it should work. That brings us to Jeezy's move to Atlanta, which is where his story really begins to take shape. Now, Atlanta in the late 90s and early 2000s wasn't just any city. It was rapidly becoming the epicenter of Southern drug distribution. And understanding this context is crucial to understanding how Jeezy was able to build the operation he did. Atlanta's geographic location made it a perfect hub for moving product throughout the Southeast. The city sits at the intersection of major interstate highways that connect the entire region, making it an ideal distribution point for drugs coming up from Florida or across from other states. But more than just geography, Atlanta had developed a culture where successful drug dealers weren't just tolerated. They were almost celebrated as entrepreneurs who had found alternative paths to the American dream. This cultural context was crucial for someone like Jeezy. In many cities, drug dealers have to operate completely underground, constantly looking over their shoulders, never able to enjoy their success. But Atlanta in this era had a different energy. Successful dealers could be somewhat open about their wealth, they could network with each other, they could even start to build connections with people in legitimate industries like music and entertainment. When Jeezy arrived in Atlanta, he was entering an environment where his ambitions could actually be realized. This wasn't just about selling drugs on street corners. This was about building a real business in a city that had the infrastructure, the culture, and the connections to support that kind of operation. This is where Jeezy made a crucial decision that separated him from most people in his situation. Instead of staying in school and hoping for the best, instead of trying to work legitimate jobs that would never pay enough to change his circumstances, he dropped out and fully committed to the streets. But here's what's important to understand. This wasn't some impulsive teenage decision made out of desperation or stupidity. This was a calculated choice made by someone who had analyzed his options and decided that the traditional path wasn't going to work for him. Jeezy looked at his situation realistically and made a strategic decision. He didn't see realistic legal paths to wealth that would allow him to escape poverty and build the kind of life he wanted. The jobs available to him, minimum wage work, entry-level positions that might lead to slightly better positions over many years, paid too little to change his life in any meaningful way. He wanted control over his income, not to be dependent on someone else's schedule, someone else's idea of what he was worth, and someone else's timeline for advancement. In his own words from interviews we've researched, "I always wanted to do business. I always wanted to be in a situation where I could run a company." This wasn't about wanting to be a drug dealer specifically. This was about wanting to be an entrepreneur, and in his environment, the drug game was the most accessible form of entrepreneurship available. Let me explain how Jeezy approached the drug game, because this is where his story gets really interesting and where you can see the business mindset that would later make him successful in music. Most people who get into selling drugs start small, maybe selling to friends, working corners, doing hand-to-hand transactions, that kind of street-level activity. Jeezy completely skipped all of that from the beginning. Instead of starting at the bottom and working his way up, Jeezy immediately started thinking about scale and organization. He began hanging around established hustlers, not to be a follower or to get protection, but specifically to learn how the business actually worked at higher levels. He was studying the game like it was a legitimate business, which in many ways it was. From these established players, Jeezy learned about supply chains, how drugs moved from suppliers to distributors to street-level dealers. He learned about managing risk, how to structure operations so that if one part got compromised, it wouldn't bring down the whole organization. He learned about building customer bases, how to establish reliable demand and maintain customer loyalty. And most importantly, he learned about avoiding law enforcement, how to operate in ways that minimize the chances of getting caught. The reason Jeezy was able to scale so quickly is because he understood something that most street-level dealers never figure out. This had to be treated like a real business with real business principles if you wanted to be successful long-term. He wasn't interested in the day-to-day hustling, the corner work, the petty dealing that gets most people caught. From the beginning, he was thinking about building an organization that could operate efficiently and profitably while minimizing risk. This approach required a completely different mindset from typical street dealing. Instead of focusing on immediate profits from individual transactions, Jeezy was thinking about building systems that could generate consistent income over time. Instead of trying to handle everything himself, he was thinking about delegation and management. Instead of operating reactively, he was thinking strategically about growth and expansion. Here's where Jeezy's operation becomes really sophisticated. According to his own accounts, this wasn't just him working alone or with a few friends. This became what he describes as a family business, a network that included his aunties, uncles, cousins, and other family members who all played different roles in the operation. This family-based structure was brilliant for several reasons. First, it created natural loyalty and trust within the organization. When you're working with family members, you don't have to worry as much about people cooperating with law enforcement or trying to take over your operation. Family bonds create a level of security that you can't get with random associates. Second, it allowed for natural expansion. Each family member had their own connections, their own geographic areas, their own customer bases. By bringing family members into the operation, Jeezy was able to expand into new territories and new markets without having to build those connections from scratch. Third, it created operational security. When law enforcement investigates drug operations, they're looking for patterns of communication and association that can help them build cases. When your organization is based on family relationships, those patterns look natural and innocent. Family members talking to each other, visiting each other, traveling together, none of that looks suspicious to outside observers. As Jeezy has explained in interviews, it was like a family business. I ran all these counties, and I grew from that to, damn near taking over Georgia. This wasn't hyperbole. This was a systematic expansion strategy that used family networks to build a regional operation. That brings us to the scale of Jeezy's operations, which is where his story becomes almost unbelievable if you don't understand the business principles he was applying. According to his own accounts, he wasn't just selling drugs in Atlanta or even just in Georgia. He was running operations across multiple counties in South Carolina, then expanding into Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and other southeastern states. In his words from recent interviews, "I just grew it from there to, taking over all these surrounding counties. So anybody that know me we going down now, anybody that know me from that era can tell you, I ran, 10, 15, 20 counties around me as a kid, you know what I'm saying, like a real operation." But wait, there's more to this story that makes it even more impressive. Jeezy has described his operation as being like a Fortune 500 company at 19, 20, 21. Now, that might sound like typical rapper exaggeration, but when you look at the details and understand the business principles he was applying, it starts to make perfect sense. A Fortune 500 company is characterized by several key features: systematic operations, professional management, geographic reach, significant revenue, and organizational structure. Jeezy's operation had all of these elements. He had systematic processes for acquiring, distributing, and selling product. He had professional management with different people responsible for different aspects of the business. He had geographic reach across multiple states. He was generating millions in revenue. And he had organizational structure with clear hierarchies and responsibilities. The key to understanding how he made $3 million is recognizing that he was involved in organized drug distribution, not petty street dealing. He operated across multiple cities in the Southeast. He worked with established networks rather than trying to do everything alone. And he focused on scale and efficiency rather than daily hustling and immediate gratification. This wasn't about standing on corners waiting for customers to come by. This wasn't about small-time dealing to support a drug habit. This was about moving serious weight through established channels, building reliable customer bases, and creating systems that could operate efficiently across large geographic areas. So how did Jeezy manage to build this kind of multi-state operation without getting caught? This is where his business mindset really shows, and where you can see the strategic thinking that would later make him successful in the music industry. Most drug dealers get caught because they're flashy, they're careless, they don't understand how law enforcement actually works, or they let ego and emotion interfere with smart decision-making. Jeezy approached it completely differently. First, he maintained operational security by keeping a relatively low profile. While he was making serious money, he wasn't the type to be flashing it around unnecessarily or drawing attention to himself through reckless behavior. He understood that attention from law enforcement was the biggest threat to his operation, so he structured everything to minimize that risk. This doesn't mean he was living like a monk or trying to appear poor. It means he was strategic about how and when he displayed his wealth. He could enjoy his success, but he did it in ways that didn't create obvious targets for law enforcement investigation. Second, he worked through networks and intermediaries rather than direct sales. This created multiple layers between him and any potential law enforcement investigation. If someone got caught at the street level, it would be much harder to trace it back to him because there were several degrees of separation between his level of the operation and the level where most arrests happen. This kind of organizational structure is standard in legitimate businesses for the same reason. It protects leadership from liability when problems occur at lower levels. Jeezy was applying corporate management principles to drug distribution, which made his operation much more resilient than typical street-level dealing. Third, and this is crucial, he was always thinking about his exit strategy. Unlike most people in the drug game who get comfortable and think it's going to last forever, Jeezy understood from the beginning that this was temporary. He was building wealth with the specific goal of transitioning to something legitimate as soon as possible. This long-term thinking affected every decision he made. He wasn't just trying to maximize short-term profits, he was trying to build sustainable wealth that he could eventually transition into legitimate investments. This meant being more conservative about risk, more strategic about expansion, and more disciplined about saving money rather than spending it all on lifestyle expenses. Now let's talk about that $3 million figure, because people always want to know if these numbers are real or just rapper exaggeration. Based on Jeezy's own accounts, the scale of his operation, and the business principles he was applying, it's actually pretty believable, and might even be conservative. If you're moving serious weight across multiple states with the kind of organizational structure he's described, with family members involved, with established supply chains and customer bases, $3 million over several years isn't outrageous. In fact, for an operation of that scale, it's actually a reasonable estimate. The reason this number is significant isn't just because of the amount. Though $3 million in the late 90s and early 2000s was serious wealth, it's significant because of what it represents in terms of business execution. To generate that kind of revenue while avoiding law enforcement, while maintaining operational security, while managing a multi-state organization, that requires a level of business sophistication that most people don't associate with drug dealing. But here's what's really impressive about Jeezy's story. He didn't just make the money, he kept it. Most drug dealers either lose their money to law enforcement when they get arrested, spend it as fast as they make it on cars and jewelry and lifestyle expenses, or lose it when their operation gets shut down and they have no legitimate way to explain where it came from. Jeezy managed to hold on to his wealth and use it as a foundation for his next move. This required incredible discipline and long-term thinking. Instead of blowing money on flashy purchases that would attract attention, he was saving and investing with the goal of eventually transitioning to legitimate business. Understanding Jeezy's success also requires understanding the psychological factors that allowed him to operate at this level without getting caught up in the typical pitfalls that destroy most people in the drug game. The streets are full of people who are smart enough and ambitious enough to build successful operations, but who ultimately fail because they can't handle the psychological pressures that come with that lifestyle. One of the biggest psychological challenges in the drug game is managing paranoia and stress. When you're operating illegally, especially at the level Jeezy was operating, you're constantly aware that law enforcement could be watching, that associates could be cooperating, that competitors could be trying to take over your territory. This kind of constant stress destroys most people's judgment and leads to poor decision-making. Jeezy managed to handle this stress by maintaining focus on his long-term goals rather than getting caught up in day-to-day drama. He understood that emotional decisions get you killed or arrested, so he approached everything strategically rather than reactively. Another major psychological challenge is dealing with success itself. When you start making serious money in the drug game, there's a natural tendency to want to show it off, to enjoy the lifestyle, to feel like you've made it. This is where most successful dealers ultimately fail. They get comfortable, they get flashy, they start taking unnecessary risks because they feel invincible. Jeezy avoided this trap by always remembering that his success was temporary and that his real goal was to transition to something legitimate. This kept him focused on building wealth rather than just enjoying wealth, on maintaining security rather than showing off his success. This is where Jeezy's story gets really interesting, because walking away from $3 million in drug money to chase a rap career sounds completely insane on the surface. Why would someone leave guaranteed fast money for the uncertainty of the music industry? The answer comes down to Jeezy understanding something that most people in the drug game never figure out. The drug game doesn't have retirement plans. As he watched what was happening around him, he started to see the writing on the wall. His friends were going to prison, others were getting killed, and pressure from law enforcement was increasing across the board. The same factors that had made Atlanta attractive for drug dealing in the late 90s were starting to change as law enforcement adapted and federal attention increased. In his own words from interviews, he realized that the drug game doesn't have retirement plans. He was watching people who had been successful for years suddenly lose everything: their freedom, their money, sometimes their lives. He understood that no matter how successful you are in that world, it's not sustainable long term. This realization was reinforced by what he was seeing happen to other major players in the game. The early 2000s saw increased federal attention on drug organizations, more sophisticated law enforcement techniques, and harsher sentences for drug-related crimes. The risk-reward calculation that had made sense in the 90s was starting to shift. There's also the psychological factor that Jeezy has talked about openly: dealing with survivor's remorse. He was watching people around him get caught up while he managed to stay free, and that kind of stress takes a toll. It made him realize that he needed to find a different path before his luck ran out. But the decision to leave wasn't just about avoiding negative consequences, it was also about recognizing positive opportunities. Jeezy was starting to see that his experiences, his credibility, and his business skills could be valuable in the music industry. He wasn't just running away from the drug game, he was running towards something that could be even more profitable and sustainable. So why music? This is where Jeezy's story becomes really strategic, because he didn't just randomly decide to become a rapper. He saw music as the perfect bridge between his street credibility and legitimate business success. And he approached it with the same systematic thinking that had made him successful in the drug game. As he explained in interviews, "Music was my talent, but business was my passion. Like, I always wanted to do business. I always wanted to be in a situation where I could run a company, and I knew I just couldn't come from the street straight to business, so that, the music was kind of like the bridge." This is a crucial insight that most people miss when they analyze Jeezy's career. He wasn't trying to become a rapper because he loved music or because he thought it would be fun. He was using music as a strategic tool to transition from illegal to legal wealth while maintaining the credibility and authenticity that would make him marketable. The genius of Jeezy's approach was that he could use his real experiences as content for his music. He wasn't making up stories about the drug game for entertainment value. He was drawing from actual experience, which gave his music an authenticity that resonated with people who had lived similar lives. But he was also smart about how he presented these experiences. Instead of glorifying the drug game or encouraging people to get involved in illegal activities, Jeezy presented his experiences as something he had moved beyond. His music became motivational. It was about using your experiences, whatever they were, to build something better. This approach allowed him to maintain his street credibility while appealing to a broader audience and avoiding legal problems. But here's what's really smart about his strategy. He was also using his music to distance himself from his past while acknowledging it. By talking about the streets in his songs, he was able to say, "This is where I came from, but this is where I am now." The music became his way of creating legal separation from his previous activities while still being able to reference them for artistic and commercial purposes. Let me explain how Jeezy turned his street credibility into a legitimate brand, because this is where his business mindset really shows and where you can see the marketing sophistication that most artists lack. The Snowman wasn't just a cool nickname or a random artistic choice. It was a calculated branding strategy that allowed him to reference his past without incriminating himself. The snowman imagery was perfect because it was obviously connected to cocaine, snow, which gave him street credibility and authenticity, but it was also abstract enough that it couldn't be used as evidence of specific criminal activity. He could rap about being the snowman, he could use snowman imagery in his videos and merchandise, he could build an entire brand around it, but legally it was just artistic expression. Jeezy understood marketing in a way that most artists don't, and this understanding came directly from his experience in the drug game. In both businesses, you need to build brand recognition, create customer loyalty, establish distribution networks, and differentiate yourself from competitors. The skills are transferable. He was giving out hundreds of thousands of mixtapes, building a grassroots fan base, and creating demand for his music before he ever signed a major record deal. As he said, "I was doing the grassroots shit. I put my money and my heart into it." This wasn't just about making music. This was about building a business. The reason this worked is because Jeezy understood his audience. He knew that people would only buy what they thought was authentic, and his real experiences gave him credibility that you can't fake. But he also knew how to package that authenticity in a way that was marketable and wouldn't get him in legal trouble. This approach required incredible discipline and strategic thinking. It would have been easy to be more explicit about his past activities, to try to build credibility by being more specific about his drug dealing experiences. But Jeezy understood that his long-term success depended on maintaining plausible deniability while still being authentic enough to connect with his audience. Now, I can't talk about Jeezy's transition from the streets to music without addressing his connection to BMF, the Black Mafia family. This relationship is crucial to understanding how Jeezy was able to make his transition so successfully, and it also shows his ability to form strategic partnerships that benefited his business goals. According to multiple sources, including interviews with BMF members, Jeezy had a close relationship with Big Meech, the leader of BMF. This wasn't just a casual friendship or a coincidental connection. BMF provided significant backing for Jeezy's early music career, helping with promotion, music videos, industry connections, and financial support. As one BMF member explained in interviews, "I look at Jeezy, the support that they offered him in those early stages. I don't think there's Jeezy without BMF. That's like my extended family, man, my people, man, support me in every shape, form, and fashion. I do the same." This backing was crucial because it gave Jeezy the resources and connections he needed to compete in the music industry at the highest level from the beginning. Most artists have to work their way up slowly, building their careers over many years with limited resources. Jeezy was able to skip several steps in that process because he had serious financial backing and industry connections through BMF. But here's what's smart about how Jeezy handled this relationship. He maintained that he was never officially part of BMF's drug operations. While he benefited from their support in the music industry, he kept his distance from their illegal activities. This allowed him to get the benefits of their backing without the legal risks. This strategic approach to the relationship shows Jeezy's business sophistication. He understood that he could work with BMF in legitimate business activities while maintaining separation from their illegal activities. This kind of compartmentalization is crucial for anyone trying to transition from illegal to legal business. The relationship also demonstrates Jeezy's ability to form mutually beneficial partnerships. BMF got credibility and legitimacy from their association with a successful artist, while Jeezy got financial backing and industry connections. Both sides benefited, which made the partnership sustainable and valuable. Jeezy has been very open about his musical influences, and understanding who he learned from helps explain his approach to both business and music. His primary influences were Tupac, UGK, Master P, and Cash Money, all artists who combined street credibility with business success and who showed that it was possible to build legitimate empires while maintaining authenticity. As Jeezy explained, "Everything I really learned about hustling, about holding my own, how to handle certain situations, was what I was listening to from Tupac or UGK or Master P and Cash Money." These artists showed him that it was possible to be authentic about street experiences while building legitimate business empires. From Tupac, Jeezy learned about authenticity and having principles. Tupac showed that you could be successful in mainstream music while still representing for people who came from difficult circumstances. He demonstrated that authenticity and commercial success weren't mutually exclusive. From UGK, Jeezy learned about regional pride and building a fan base in the South. UGK showed that you didn't have to conform to East Coast or West Coast standards to be successful. You could represent your own region and build a loyal following based on that authenticity. From Master P, Jeezy learned about entrepreneurship and building business empires. Master P showed that artists could own their own labels, control their own distribution, and build wealth through business ownership rather than just recording contracts. From Cash Money, Jeezy learned about lifestyle marketing and building aspirational brands. Cash Money showed how to use wealth and lifestyle as marketing tools while still maintaining street credibility. The reason this is important is because it shows that Jeezy's transition wasn't accidental. He was studying successful models and applying those lessons to his own situation. He learned from artists who had successfully navigated the transition from street credibility to mainstream success, and he adapted their strategies to his own circumstances. Here's why Jeezy's story is different from other rappers who claim street credibility. His experiences were real, but more importantly, he understood how to leverage that authenticity without getting caught up in legal problems or limiting his commercial potential. When Jeezy rapped about trap houses and moving weight, he wasn't making it up for entertainment value or trying to create a fictional persona. He was drawing from actual experience, which gave his music a level of authenticity that resonated with people who had lived similar lives. But he was also smart about how he presented these experiences. Instead of glorifying the game or encouraging people to get involved in illegal activities, Jeezy presented it as something he had moved beyond. His music became motivational. It was about using your experiences, whatever they were, to build something better. This approach allowed him to maintain his street credibility while appealing to a broader audience. The authenticity factor was crucial for Jeezy's success because it differentiated him from other artists who were trying to appeal to similar audiences. In the early 2000s, there were many rappers claiming street credibility, but most of them were either exaggerating their experiences or presenting them in ways that felt inauthentic to people who had actually lived that life. Jeezy's music felt real because it was real. When he rapped about the stress of dealing with law enforcement, about the difficulty of trusting people in illegal businesses, about the psychological toll of living that lifestyle, people could tell that he was speaking from experience, not just trying to sound cool. But the genius of his approach was that he used this authenticity as a foundation for building something positive rather than just dwelling on negative experiences. His music became about transformation and motivation rather than just documentation of street life. What really separates Jeezy from other artists is his business mindset, which he developed during his time in the drug game and then applied to his music career. From the beginning, he understood that music was just one part of building a larger business empire. He wasn't just trying to be a successful rapper, he was trying to be a successful businessman who happened to rap. This mindset shows up in everything he did: his approach to marketing, his investment in his own career, his strategic partnerships, his brand building. All of it was calculated to build long-term wealth rather than just short-term success. As he explained, "I just turned a snowman into a brand, into something that was solid. That's tangible. This wasn't about getting famous or having hit songs. This was about building a sustainable business that could generate wealth for decades." The business mindset also affected how he approached the creative process. Instead of just making music that he liked or that expressed his feelings, Jeezy was thinking about his audience, about market demand, about how to create content that would be both authentic and commercially viable. This doesn't mean his music was calculated or inauthentic. It means he understood how to be authentic in ways that would also be commercially successful. He could draw from his real experiences while presenting them in ways that would appeal to the broadest possible audience. The business mindset also showed up in his approach to the music industry itself. Instead of just trying to get signed to a major label and hoping for the best, Jeezy built his own buzz, created his own demand, and positioned himself to negotiate from a position of strength. One of the most impressive things about Jeezy's story is how he avoided the pitfalls that destroy most people who try to transition from illegal to legal money. He didn't get caught up in trying to maintain his street reputation at the expense of his business interests. He didn't let ego or pride interfere with smart decision-making. He didn't make the mistake of thinking that past success guaranteed future success. When conflicts arose, like his eventual falling out with BMF, Jeezy handled them strategically rather than emotionally. He understood that his long-term success was more important than any short-term disputes or ego battles. This is where his business background really shows. Emotional decisions get you killed or arrested. You have to be able to think strategically, manage relationships carefully, and always prioritize long-term survival over short-term satisfaction. Jeezy applied that same level of strategic thinking to his music career, which allowed him to navigate industry politics and personal conflicts without derailing his success. The ability to avoid pitfalls also came from his understanding of what had destroyed other people who had tried to make similar transitions. He had seen people lose everything because they couldn't let go of their street reputation, because they made emotional decisions, because they trusted the wrong people, or because they didn't understand how different the music industry was from the streets. Jeezy learned from other people's mistakes and made sure not to repeat them. This kind of strategic learning and adaptation is what separates successful entrepreneurs from people who just get lucky once and then lose everything. That brings us to Jeezy's breakthrough in the music industry, which happened faster than anyone expected but was actually the result of years of strategic preparation. His mixtapes were creating serious buzz throughout the South, and when he finally released Let's Get It, Thug Motivation 101, it was an immediate success that validated everything he had been working toward. But here's what's interesting about Jeezy's success. It wasn't just about the music, it was about the complete package. He had the street credibility, the business mindset, the marketing strategy, and the financial resources to invest in his career properly. Most artists have to choose between authenticity and commercial success. Jeezy found a way to have both. The album did over 3 million copies, which meant that Jeezy had successfully transitioned from making millions in the drug game to making millions in the music industry. But more importantly, he had done it legally, sustainably, and in a way that set him up for long-term success rather than just short-term profits. The success of Let's Get It also validated Jeezy's strategic approach to the transition. He had bet everything on the idea that his street experiences could be transformed into commercially successful music, and the market proved him right. This wasn't just about getting lucky. This was about executing a carefully planned strategy. The album's success also opened doors for Jeezy that wouldn't have been available if he had tried to transition to legitimate business through other means. Suddenly, he had access to major label resources, mainstream media attention, and business opportunities that were completely separate from his past activities. Jeezy's album, The Recession, marked a turning point in his career and his personal development. This was when he really started to mature as both an artist and a businessman, and when you could see him evolving beyond just his street experiences into someone who was thinking about broader social and economic issues. As he explained, "When I wrote The Recession, it was like the first time I really sat back, started reading books, started figuring out my health." This period showed Jeezy's evolution from someone who was just trying to escape the streets to someone who was building a legitimate business empire and thinking about his long-term impact. The album also showed his ability to adapt his message and his brand to changing circumstances. Instead of just continuing to rap about his past experiences, he was addressing current events, economic conditions, and social issues that affected his audience. This evolution was crucial for his long-term success because it showed that he could grow as an artist and remain relevant as circumstances changed. The focus on health and education during this period also showed Jeezy's understanding that long-term success requires personal development, not just business success. He was investing in himself as a person, not just as a brand, which positioned him for sustained success over decades rather than just a few years. Jeezy has been very open about dealing with survivor's remorse, the psychological impact of making it out when so many people around him didn't. This is a crucial part of his story because it shows the human cost of success in that environment and the psychological challenges that come with transitioning from illegal to legal success. As he explained, "I dealt with survivor's remorse into the recession. I tried to save everybody a million times. It's not gonna work. You know what I'm saying? I keep digging myself in a deeper hole and I'm drinking, I'm smoking, I'm not focused." This realization was part of what motivated him to focus on his own success rather than trying to bring everyone with him. It's a difficult lesson that many successful people have to learn. You can't save everyone, and trying to do so can actually prevent you from achieving the success that would allow you to help people more effectively. The psychological aspect of his story is important because it shows that transitioning from the streets to legitimate success isn't just about money or strategy. It's also about dealing with the emotional and psychological challenges that come with leaving that life behind. The survivor's remorse also motivated Jeezy to use his platform to try to help people in positive ways. Instead of just enjoying his success, he became focused on creating opportunities for other people and using his influence to address some of the social and economic conditions that create the circumstances he came from. Now here's where Jeezy's story takes an interesting turn that shows his confidence in how well he executed his transition strategy. In recent interviews, he's been surprisingly open about his past operations and has even been bragging about how he managed to avoid getting caught despite running such a large-scale operation. In a recent interview that went viral, Jeezy was laughing about the fact that he never got hit with a RICO charge despite running what he describes as a multi-million-dollar operation across multiple states. He said, "I was running a multi-million drug operation," and was clearly amused by the fact that he managed to avoid the kind of federal prosecution that took down so many other major players from that era. This openness about his past shows several things. First, it demonstrates his confidence that he's legally protected by the statute of limitations and by the way he structured his operations. He's not worried about law enforcement coming after him now because enough time has passed and because he was careful about how he operated. Second, it shows his pride in having executed such a successful transition. Jeezy clearly sees his ability to build a major drug operation and then transition to legitimate success without getting caught as a significant achievement. He's bragging about it because he knows how rare it is for someone to pull off that kind of transition successfully. Third, it demonstrates his understanding that his past experiences are now part of his brand and his credibility. Instead of trying to hide from his past or downplay it, he's embracing it as part of what makes him unique and authentic. He knows that his story of successful transition is part of what makes him interesting and marketable. The fact that he's comfortable being so open about his past also shows how completely he's transitioned to legitimate success. He's not worried about his reputation in the streets anymore, and he's not worried about law enforcement, so he can be honest about his experiences in ways that he couldn't when he was actively trying to distance himself from that life. When you listen to Jeezy talk about his past in recent interviews, it's clear that he's genuinely proud of what he accomplished, both in the streets and in his transition to legitimate success. And when you understand the full scope of what he did, it's easy to see why he feels that way. Think about what Jeezy actually accomplished. He built a multi-million-dollar operation across multiple states while still a teenager. He managed to avoid getting caught despite operating at a scale that typically attracts federal attention. He successfully transitioned that wealth into a legitimate music career. He built a brand and a business empire that has sustained success for over 2 decades. And he did all of this while coming from poverty with no formal business education or family connections. From a pure business perspective, regardless of the legality of his early activities, that's an impressive track record. It demonstrates strategic thinking, risk management, organizational skills, marketing ability, and long-term planning that most MBA graduates never develop. The bragging also serves a strategic purpose for Jeezy's current brand. In hip-hop culture, authenticity and credibility are crucial, and his ability to point to real experiences and real success gives him a level of credibility that artists without that background can't match. But there's also a deeper psychological element to the bragging. Jeezy came from circumstances where success seemed impossible through legitimate means. The fact that he not only achieved success but did it on such a large scale and then successfully transitioned to legitimate business represents a kind of vindication of his early decisions and his strategic thinking. Today, young Jeezy, now known simply as Jeezy, is recognized as one of the pioneers of trap music and one of the most successful artists to transition from the streets to legitimate business success. His story is studied by other artists and entrepreneurs as an example of how to leverage authenticity and street credibility into long-term wealth. But here's what's really impressive about his legacy. He didn't just make the transition himself. He helped legitimize trap music as a genre and showed other artists that it was possible to be authentic about street experiences while building legitimate careers. Before Jeezy, most rap music about drug dealing was either obviously fictional or presented in ways that glorified illegal activity. Jeezy found a way to be authentic about those experiences while presenting them as something to move beyond rather than something to aspire to. This approach opened the door for an entire generation of artists who could draw from similar experiences without getting caught up in legal problems or limiting their commercial potential. The influence of Jeezy's approach can be seen in the careers of artists like Future, Gucci Mane, T.I., and many others who have successfully built mainstream careers while maintaining street credibility. They learned from Jeezy's model of how to be authentic without being self-destructive. Jeezy's business approach has also influenced how artists think about building careers in hip-hop. His focus on ownership, brand building, and long-term wealth creation rather than just short-term success has become a standard approach for successful artists in the genre. The reason Jeezy's story matters isn't just because he made money or became famous. It's because he showed that it's possible to use your experiences, whatever they are, as a foundation for building something legitimate and sustainable. His success extends far beyond music into various business ventures and investments. Jeezy has built a business empire that includes real estate investments, restaurant ownership, media companies, and various other legitimate business ventures. He's used his music success as a platform for building wealth through business ownership rather than just entertainment income. This approach demonstrates the long-term thinking that characterized his entire career. Instead of just trying to maximize income from music, he's been building assets and businesses that can generate wealth independently of his entertainment career. The business empire also validates his original strategy of using music as a bridge to legitimate business success. He's achieved his original goal of being able to run a company and has built the kind of business success that would have been impossible to achieve through illegal means. One of the most important aspects of Jeezy's legacy is how his story has inspired other people who come from similar circumstances. His music and his story show that it's possible to escape poverty and build legitimate success even when you start from the most difficult circumstances. The motivational aspect of Jeezy's story is crucial because it provides a positive model for people who might otherwise see illegal activities as their only path to success. By showing that street experiences can be transformed into legitimate success, Jeezy has provided an alternative narrative that encourages people to think strategically about their long-term goals rather than just focusing on immediate survival. This motivational impact extends beyond just people who have been involved in illegal activities. Jeezy's story resonates with anyone who has faced significant obstacles and demonstrates that strategic thinking, hard work, and long-term planning can overcome almost any disadvantage. The fact that Jeezy has been open about both his past mistakes and his strategic thinking makes his story more valuable as a learning tool. People can understand not just what he did, but why he did it, and how they might apply similar principles to their own circumstances. And so young Jeezy really is the perfect example of how to transition from illegal to legal wealth successfully, and his recent bragging about never getting caught just proves how confident he is in the strategy he executed. The reason he was able to make $3 million in the drug game and then transition to an even more successful music career comes down to several key factors: strategic thinking, business mindset, operational security, and understanding when to walk away. Unlike most people who get caught up in the streets, Jeezy always treated his drug operation like a legitimate business. He focused on scale rather than daily hustling. He built networks rather than working alone. He maintained operational security rather than being flashy. And most importantly, he always had an exit strategy. The transition to music wasn't accidental. It was a calculated move that allowed him to leverage his street credibility while building a legitimate career. He used his real experiences as content for his music, but he was smart about how he presented those experiences. Instead of glorifying illegal activity, he presented it as something to move beyond. The BMF connection provided crucial support during his transition, but Jeezy was smart about maintaining separation between legitimate and illegal activities. This allowed him to benefit from their backing without taking on their legal risks. His recent interviews where he's bragging about never getting caught show how completely he's transitioned to legitimate success. He's not worried about law enforcement anymore, and he's proud of having executed such a successful strategy. The fact that he can openly discuss his past without fear shows how well he planned and executed his transition. In my opinion, Jeezy's story is one of the most impressive examples of strategic career transition in hip-hop history. He managed to build wealth in an illegal industry, avoid getting caught, and then use that foundation to build an even more successful legal career. That's not luck. That's business intelligence applied consistently over many years. The motivational aspect of his story is also crucial. Jeezy has shown that it's possible to escape poverty and build legitimate success even when you start from the most difficult circumstances. His story provides a positive model for people who might otherwise see illegal activities as their only path to success. As of now, Jeezy continues to be successful in music and business, proving that his transition strategy worked exactly as planned. He went from running a Fortune 500 level drug operation to building a legitimate entertainment empire, and he did it without ever doing serious prison time or losing his wealth to law enforcement. The fact that he's now comfortable bragging about his past shows how completely he's moved beyond that life while still being able to use those experiences as part of his brand and credibility. It's a masterclass in strategic career transition that other artists and entrepreneurs continue to study and learn from. Let me know if you have any other artists you'd like me to break down who made similar transitions from the streets to legitimate success. The intersection of street credibility and business success in hip-hop is fascinating, and there are definitely more stories worth exploring, though few are as strategically executed as Jeezy's. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Jeezy's business strategy and his recent bragging about beating the system, make sure to subscribe for more content breaking down the real stories behind hip-hop's biggest successes. The business side of these transitions is often more interesting than the music itself. This has been your host breaking down how young Jeezy built a $3 million drug empire, successfully transitioned to legitimate business, and now brags about never getting caught. It's a story of strategic thinking, business intelligence, and perfect timing that shows what's possible when street smarts meet legitimate business opportunities. I'll see you guys next time.